Republicans had a pretty strong showing in the state of Louisiana last night, which is certainly encouraging for them considering the fact that most of this year's elections have been underperformances. Now, I will note that Louisiana is a safe Republican state when it comes to federal races, so this really shouldn't be that surprising, but I think what caught a lot of people off guard was the fact that Republicans were able to avoid runoff elections in the governor's race, which obviously would have diverted a lot of RNC money towards it had it gone on to the runoff in the middle of November. So we're going to talk about what this overperformance means for the GOP, how this happened, and if this could potentially point to overperformances in November's elections as well. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So Jeff Landry will be the next Republican governor from Louisiana. He got 51.6% of the vote. Now, the way Louisiana does elections is quite odd. Yesterday, of course, was a Saturday, but that was their election day in which they have their blanket primaries, which essentially puts Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all of the candidates running for office on the same exact ballot. If any of the candidates gets to 50% or more, they end up becoming that elected position. So effectively, it is the election if you can get over 50% of the vote. So Jeff Landry was able to do that yesterday. He got over the hump. So this obviously saves Republicans a whole lot of money. And they did a bit better than expected because many Republicans didn't think it was possible to get over 50% of the vote with so many candidates on the ballot. Even though Jeff Landry had Trump's endorsement, he had the support of most people in the Louisiana GOP. But you did have other Republicans taking up 6% of the vote, 2% of the vote, etc. So you did have other Republicans on the ballot. But nonetheless, Jeff Landry had a really impressive showing in Louisiana. The lieutenant governor, Billy Nungesser, a far more impressive showing with 65% of the vote. Now, if you add up the total amount of vote for Republicans in this election, you get to nearly 77%. So again, in a state like Louisiana, 77% of the vote is astronomical. You know, normally Republicans get in the high 50s, low 60s in the state. So 77% of the vote is incredibly impressive. Now, Billy Nungesser is an incredibly popular statewide official. He became popular because of the natural disaster response that he led. And that, of course, endeared him with a lot of Louisiana voters. So I think the thing that stood out the most was his margin in Orleans Parish, which, of course, is home to New Orleans. Now, if you take a look at the 2020 election, Donald Trump only got 15% of the vote here. And if we take a look at the primary election for governor, Jeff Landry only got 10% of the vote. But if we take a look here, Nungesser got 41% of the vote in Orleans Parish, which must indicate he got a sizable portion of the black vote as well. And that, of course, is a story of last night's election. Black turnout was down considerably. It's very evident by the results in Louisiana. Again, the majority of Democrats in Louisiana are black voters. So, of course, naturally, if their turnout is going to be higher, Democrats are going to do better, and vice versa. And we're going to compare this, of course, to the 2019 election results in just a second. But, you know, an absolute blowout among Republicans. And if we look at the state legislature, Republicans are winning seats here that in some cases Biden won by nearly double digits. And the Republican margins were incredibly impressive. Apparently, one of these districts had gone to Joe Biden by about 8 points, and the Republican won by nearly 30. So insanely impressive showing for the GOP, certainly encouraging going forward. How significant actually is this in a deep red state like Louisiana? Well, if we take a look at Louisiana's historical politics, for the vast majority of its history, it has been a very, very Democratic state. Now, obviously, in recent times, especially in the Obama era, Republicans have sort of gained control of the state. Of course, John Bel Edwards was the last statewide elected Democrat. He was elected in 2015. Before him, Mary Landrieu was the last elected Democrat in the state, and that was back on the ballot with Obama in 2008. So that goes to show you that Democrats getting elected in Louisiana is a pretty rare occurrence nowadays, but it wasn't too long ago where Democrats completely dominated the state legislature, the statewide offices. I mean, Republicans didn't gain full control of the legislature until 2011. So before 2011, you have to go back probably since around the Reconstruction era, right here in the 1870s, when Republicans actually gained control of the legislature. So I don't know if they have the results up for the elections this soon. Obviously, they just happened yesterday, but Republicans had a very, very impressive showing nonetheless. They gained seats in the legislature I think the Senate stayed about the same, but nonetheless, they had a really good showing, and especially because this is really seen by a lot of people as the formal death of the Louisiana Democrats. Again, they had been a rare breed for some time now. John Bel Edwards was really their last star candidate. Now Republicans have complete control of the state, and it doesn't look like Democrats are going to win the state of Louisiana for a very long time. Again, things change. You do have rare cases. We saw the Alabama special election. You had Doug Jones win there, so you never know. But obviously, based on the results here, it looks like Louisiana Democrats aren't going to win for a very long time. Now, what implications does this have for the Virginia races, Kentucky? I tend to think not much. I think a lot of people are staking a lot of hope in the Louisiana results, thinking that these could be replicated in other states in the nation. But Louisiana's electorate is very different than Kentucky's, Virginia's, and in some cases even Mississippi's. You know, in Mississippi, you've got Brandon Presley, who is not expected to win, but will probably overperform Joe Biden in the state of Mississippi. So you do have a stronger Democrat running in Mississippi. Mississippi had a pretty close governor's race back in 2019. So it's not surprising that when you have a more conservative centrist Democrat running, you're going to have a closer result. But, you know, Virginia, totally different demographics. You're talking about a much more highly educated electorate, less evangelical, less rural. So the electorates are totally different. So that's why I think the Louisiana results aren't going to mean too much for the future elections. Again, it's very encouraging for Republicans, but just looking at the states ahead, the electorates are completely different, especially in Virginia. Virginia's electorate resembles that much more of a purple or even blue state. So Louisiana has a much more evangelical electorate, much more conservative electorate. Louisiana is one of the few states where the pro-life position on abortion is an asset, not a liability. If we go back to 2020, there was a referendum in the state to essentially say that abortion is not a protected right in Louisiana. 62% of voters agreed with that, 37%, 38% effectively, disagreed. That's a larger margin than Donald Trump won the state of Louisiana. The only areas that really disagreed with that, of course, were Orleans Parish and East Baton Rouge, which is just Baton Rouge, the state capital. So every other portion of the state agreed with this overwhelmingly. So, you know, Jeff Landry obviously being a pro-life Republican. You have you have one notable pro-life Democrat. She's a black Democrat. I don't remember her name. But those candidates tend to do very well in Louisiana. But Virginia, certainly not. Even in the state of Kentucky, if we go back to 2022 and pull up Kentucky, there was a referendum in Kentucky on abortion after Roe v. Wade was struck down, and voters actually sided with the pro-choice position on that ballot measure. The measure explicitly said that abortion is not a right. It was basically the same exact vote we saw in Louisiana just 2 years later in Kentucky, and that vote failed 52-47. Now, I will note that Kentucky is not really a part of the Deep South. It's not really a southern state, although some people will debate that, but if you're talking about states of the former Confederacy, it's definitely not. The no right to an abortion position won, and it wasn't even just in the urban areas, although it lost there very overwhelmingly, but even some of the exurban and even some rural counties voted against this. So you're not really seeing the large movement in favor of the pro-life position that you saw in Louisiana. And certainly if this election were held in Virginia, I think the pro-choice side would probably win by 30-something points. So abortion is one of those issues that is a massive liability to Republicans in most states. Democrats are certainly trying to run on it in Virginia. Even in Kentucky, Andy Beshear is running on abortion partly. Trying to paint Republicans as extreme on the issue. And even in a deep red state like Kentucky, where Donald Trump both times got over 60% of the vote, voters are likely going to listen to that. If we take a look at the polling in Kentucky, Daniel Cameron is losing, in some cases by a large amount. You know, the latest poll out of Emerson College, and again, Emerson College isn't the most reliable pollster, especially after 2022, but a 49-33% margin for Andy Beshear, 48-42, 47-40. This should not be happening in a deep red state. Now, Andy Beshear is an incredibly popular governor. Gubernatorial races are very different than statewide races. Of course, we could certainly say that with Louisiana. You know, John Bel Edwards winning by around 3 points didn't signify Donald Trump losing the state in 2020. In fact, Donald Trump won Louisiana by around 19 points. So these elections don't always indicate national trends, again, governor's races are very different. You know, based on the Virginia governor's race in 2021, we should have expected a massive red wave. And that was kind of what was anticipated until we saw Roe v. Wade get overturned. Then there was a massive sea change in those special elections. And in the Virginia special elections, Republicans have been underperforming, even in deep red seats. So that isn't really a good sign going forward. You know, we're going to talk about the early vote in Virginia and New Jersey probably later on this week because we do have some numbers there. And, you know, so far things are lining up for the Democrats. They're outperforming in those states. You know, Republicans continue to rely on only in-person voting, and that's largely thanks to Donald Trump, who has sort of pushed away and discouraged early voting. And as a result, you have Democrats building up monumental leads in the early vote that the Republicans just simply can't overcome. So, you know, looking ahead at the November elections, I don't really think the Louisiana results are going to have much of a big sway. Again, Louisiana is very different than some of the other states that are having elections. You know, maybe you could argue Mississippi is the most similar because you do have a large African-American population. You have a white population that votes essentially 80-20 for Republicans. So, you know, if black turnout is down in Louisiana, potentially that could point to black turnout being down in Mississippi as well. Obviously, we'll have to wait to see. We'll talk about the Mississippi governor's race probably sometime during the week, since, of course, that's one of the elections that we have to look forward to in November. But as for Louisiana, it's essentially over. You do have some runoffs for some minor statewide positions, but Republicans are going to win those by pretty large margins, just given the fact that it's Louisiana. But effectively, last night was the first election night of the November elections, of the big elections that we're talking about. Of course, we've still got Kentucky, Mississippi, New Jersey, and Virginia. We will be live streaming on election night, so stay tuned for updates on that. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.